Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the Artist First Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Pick them up at artistfirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at artistfirst.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's your host, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Brought to you by the miracles of modern medicine and several electronic devices.
Yes.
We are here.
Yes. We've gone through our technical difficulties.
The interwebs have survived the apocalypse or something.
Apocalypse?
Well, I don't know. They moved us off. Well, it's a long and terrible story, but at the end of the day, we've had to move technologies. So if we sound silkier and or sexier, you can just blame my voice.
I see.
Because I have some sort of spring fever. That's
Spring people.
You know, all those diction lessons aren't paying off.
Yes.
Mm.
Oh.
Oh.
So he's Michael. I'm Margaret.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome.
That's right. And the other stuff that we practiced isn't working either. Well, yes, and I'm Michael. And tonight that we are going to talk. We're going to go with a catchphrase first. The truth will set you free.
Indeed.
We're going to talk about the truth, and we're going to jump right into it. I think because we have maybe a show that may go long if it all goes well. But sorry, you have something else to add before we jump?
No. Do you want me to read it?
Well, I was just going to say that we often hear the phrase, "This is my truth." Well, here comes ours.
Oh, dear.
We have a nice quote from
Tole.
Eckhart.
Mm-hmm. All righty. The truth is inseparable from who you are. Yes, you are the truth. If you look for it elsewhere, you will be deceived every time. Eckhart
Tolle. So that's sort of one of those lovely Tolle quotes, which is sort of, spins around a little bit and needs to be unpacked. So we're going to do that. But the other piece of this, and as I mentioned, you hear often this phrase these days, a lot maybe on social media or maybe even in casual conversation when people say, well, this is my truth. And this is sort of a contradiction in terms to some extent, and maybe that's why people use it, because it has that sort of, a koan, a Zen koan kind of feel to it. Because
Vision.
a bit, because when you think of truth, you think of something which is, let's say, in the sense of a scientific truth. You say, well, this is something which we can observe, and we can theorize about, and we can also prove to everyone's satisfaction. The old saying that Roger Penrose would say once is that we can prove this to as many digits as you're willing to spend the time calculating. So we call that, truth, scientific truth. And it also kind of carries along with it, the connotation of sort of a universal truth, something which applies everywhere. So you say the law of gravity, for argument's sake, seems to, as far as we can tell, out to as many digits as we are willing to spend time calculating, that the law of gravity, what gets us, from out of bed and down the stairs, as well as, to the moon or to any nearby satellite or planet, is the laws of gravitational mechanics. And those seem to be truth. But when you hear people say, this is my truth, you really can't use that about, let's say, the laws of gravity. You say, well, this is my gravity, and in my gravity, people orbit me. Because I have so much mass.
Well, there are a number of people who do think that way. Everything orbits around me.
Well, and that is the my truth part of it.
Right. That's the my part.
The my truth, people say this is my truth, what they're really saying is that, to put it exactly in those same terms, within my orbit, or if you're going to interact with me, you have to agree with my truth. And sometimes people will argue over their own truth. Say, well, this is my truth, and this is how I see it, and this is my truth, and this is how I see it. And if you want to see sort of an argument which has no end or no satisfactory conclusion, it's when two people are arguing from these sort of tautological positions. So you say, in essence, that my truth is true because I say it's true. That's why it makes it true. This is a tautology. It holds in upon itself and kind of doesn't have any seams. You can't attack it because no amount of external argument or reference to that which is outside of this little sphere of the my truth is accepted. In other words, you close the universe. You make a very tiny round little ball, a teeny tiny little ball, and you say, inside this ball is my truth. So it's the ball of my truth. And if you want to deal with me, if I encase myself, and this is really what Margaret was talking about, people encase themselves in their truth. And what that really means is that if you are going to enter into my sphere, into my truth, you no longer can disagree with my truth. I've become sort of the absolute arbiter of what's truth within this sphere. Now, when you start to dissect it in that way, it gets sort of shaky. It gets sort of like, well, that seems, to use a weird word, arbitrary. My truth doesn't seem to have any foundation yet. That does not stop people from having them.
Well, I think it stems back to the definition of what truth is.
Very much so. Maybe we should go into that a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I thought you were going to.
Well, all right. Definition of truth. Who is this? Oh, American Heritage.
They're very good. True.
Reality, actuality, or the reality of a situation, or, which is very interesting, conformity to fact or actuality. So you when you look at it that way, it's like interesting. So that particular definition, conformity to fact or actuality, becomes arbitrary.
It can do if you fungible with your word fact. Because I think American Heritage is much more looking, at least their definition is much more looking towards the scientific truth. It's talking about reality and actuality, and so this is one would say you could use a word that kind of encompasses both those things, which is sort of an objectivity, an objective reality.
Okay.
So and to go a little bit into quantum mechanical terms, when you talk about the objective reality, you're talking about the observed reality. You're talking about the fact that when something happens, when some, let's say, physical event happens, a tree falls in the forest, to pick an arbitrarily weird example, the tree has fallen. You have some evidence that the tree was at one point upright, and you have some evidence that the tree is now no longer upright, and then you can infer, even if you never saw it, that some event happened to make the tree fall. Now, that can be anything. But the fact is that you can observe a fallen tree, and you can infer that it fell, that it at one point stood. And then if you then look at that from the point of view of, am I going to evaluate this? I say, well, I'm going to first have a theory. Trees fall. That's my first theory. But then you can then evaluate it by saying, well, I've observed trees. I didn't observe this one fall, but I've observed trees. And if you sit there and literally watch a tree or a bunch of trees, eventually one will fall. You can start to build a case for this. But that's more of an objective reality. You're an observer of an event. The event happens. And science is done by recording things and then referring back and saying, well, I saw this tree on this particular time and date was upright. And then the next day, mark it off, upright. And you go right along and say, April 7th at 4:57 p.m., not upright anymore. So what happened here? And it becomes a sort of a detective story. That's the truth I think American Heritage is talking about. But that's not my truth. It's closer when they come to the third, I guess, definition there.
So what you're saying, basically, is that this is the conformity, the word that they're using, has to do with whether or not it correlates to repeatable results.
Well, and I think because they throw in the word conformity to fact.
Right.
So, and the converse would be not truth, where you say, well, here's a fact, and I don't believe the fact. No matter how much you prove the fact to me, I'm just going to disbelieve it. And that I think Heritage would say, well, now you're no longer dealing in the truth. However, as we said before, that does not stop people from doing that.
Well, yes. This is how humans operate. Even though we may know that something is not true, we choose to believe otherwise, which is a fascinating thing that humans can do. Because if you think about it, no other animal actually does that. It is what it is for them. There's no food in my bowl. I'm going to go and bother my human. Just very, very straightforward. I guess you can say we're like the only species that lies to ourselves.
Isn't that? But it's funny. It's true. But isn't that interesting? Because the capacity to believe in the face of objective reality, something contrary.
Right.
There was that old science fiction show, which I think many people are familiar with, which is Star Trek. And just to refer very briefly to it, there was a character on the show who was extremely grounded in fact. That was Mr. Spock. And he would oftentimes be accused of sort of being a machine or being cold or unemotional. But that was his whole thing. The whole thing was that a person like that is objectively grounded in observable reality and nothing else but. So anything that would come into be observed by that type of person has to be tested and weighed and proven, and then it's accepted. And then once you've done that, you cannot dissuade them from that, because they say, well, this is the fact. This is the truth. This is what I'm grounding all my observations on. But if you turn that around, if you look at human beings, we are not like that. And Margaret's right. Every other species on the planet, I don't think you might perhaps say that some of the other species on the planet, we can allude to saying, well, maybe they're having some sort of other thoughts, so they're actually believing something which isn't true. But in fact, there's no evidence for that I'm aware of. But there's tons, hundreds of thousands of years in writings and every other type of thing where human beings will imagine things which just don't exist, and then build whole philosophies, perhaps, and actually arrive at incredible insights and incredible truths about the universe which cannot be observed. And these aren't just fantasies. No one on the planet can observe the quantum phenomena that we not only believe but can prove. So the actual phenomena, the very far downstream effects can be observed, and then we have been able to, through much trial and error and much theorization and much imagination, kind of work out a whole thing which seems to be a perfectly consistent explanation to the extent that we can spend time calculating it, that explains all these phenomena. Yet, if you really, really wanted to say, well, where are these things? Show me a quanta. You can't. And you have to accept that there is no observational proof of any of this. And there are many things in science which we cannot observationally prove. How did we get there? It was a leap. And that the ability to do that is essential. If we're grounded merely in the observational and merely in the truth that you can feel or the truth that you can lay your fingers on, you're not going to get those types of insights about what's really happening out there.
Well, the revelations of many of the unseen mechanics of how creation works can be theorized, explored through various techniques that man has come up with. For instance, like mathematics. It's another language in which to explore things on a really basic level. You can't touch or feel the numbers or the equations or any of the derivatives, but you know that they have applications and they are real. But man is the only one that we know of that is capable of creating this world or this language to begin to explore what else is there that we cannot touch or see, but we can perceive. So it's really quite fascinating when you appreciate the fact that as a human, you can do this. And to allow yourself to imagine things, to project, to take a thought and let it percolate until you begin to create something. Creation, the act of creating something, is an amazing thing. Participating in a process where you start with one thing and you go through round after round of qualifying the substance that you have in your hands until you're able to get other result is amazing. It started out with this generalization of what they say are tool use. But frankly, it has to do with acting on creation, or a creative concept that you wanted to bring into solid form, and the real meaning of manifestation.
Yeah, that's very true. Margaret, you guys may have heard us talk about this, but Margaret took more mathematics than any sane person should.
No,
but some of the mathematics, I don't want to go too far deeply into it, but some of the mathematics, it literally has to do with something called imaginary numbers. So if you think about every other species on the planet, there are certain rules to these numbers, but one of the primary rules to this particular branch of mathematics violates all the other branches of mathematics rules. But somebody said, if we just break this one rule, just this one, and we're not going to break them all, we're just going to break one, and then see what happens, And if it doesn't all collapse into a blinding mess, maybe we'll get something out of it. Well, in fact, you get a whole branch of science which actually very neatly explains a huge amount of the universe, a huge amount of what we call the electromagnetic spectrum occurs in the imaginary plane. They call it the imaginary plane. It's not Wonder Woman's plane, but it's like an imaginary plane. And if you to get there is a leap of faith, which in essence you say to yourself, well, I can't figure out how to solve this problem, so let me break a rule. Every time I go to solve this problem, I run up against this stupid number, which I don't know what to do with. So I'm just going to say, well, just let's assume that number works.
Yeah, let's assume that it works this way.
Right, and then we'll just try it. Now, so let me go back to our premise. So that's an interesting application of this ability to say that I'm going to limit my truth A mathematician, when he or she is looking at a problem, oftentimes will say, well, let's put some limits on that. Let's put it in its own little bubble and pretend that everything is very, very good word here to use. We're going to pretend that everything inside this bubble works just the way I think it's going to work. Now, everyone else is going to come along and say, that doesn't work that way. And you're going to say, listen, you're harshing my mellow, and this is my bubble. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do what I want. This is my truth. And if you're going to deal with me, if you're going to talk to my branch of science, you've got to enter into my bubble and accept my truth. Now, that can either get you into an asylum, or it can get you a Nobel Prize under certain circumstances, because the actual exploration of objective reality is far beyond. I think we all know this at a certain level, but it's far beyond what we can actually sense. The universe, as Tolle often says, exists within you. You are a consciousness within which the universe exists. So Tolle's phrase really says that you're carrying around not just your truth, but everything within you. And the consciousness, that which is greater than, and I'm going to say this very carefully, it's greater than the truth. Okay? The consciousness encompasses the truth. If the truth is objective reality, which is far beyond perceived reality, it's far, far, far beyond perceived reality. The only way we get to explore true objective reality is by going beyond perceived reality. And we do that with this amazing capacity to pretend, to use my truth to get beyond the limits. And how can you do that? Let's just talk about this for a second, because this is extremely important. Tolle goes into this in a different way. If all you are is some piece of matter which exists within a universe as a cog in a wheel, there's no way for you to go beyond that. You can't expand. It's like saying, what's outside the universe? Well, nothing's outside the universe. If you are a cog in the universe, nothing's outside you. You exist completely within the bounds of you, yourself, and you're a form, and somehow you got amassed out of a pile of goo, and you'll go back to a pile of goo. If that's all you are, not a conscious being which is far vaster than your physical incarnation, that's all you are. You could not expand beyond your perceptions. The ability to imagine that which cannot be seen, to pretend that something which I have no idea if it's really true or not, but I'm just going to pretend really, really hard and then invent quantum mechanics or pretend really, really hard and invent the imaginary plane. Mm-hmm. And then find out that I've broken through, that my conscious being, which is vaster than the truth, is able to exceed my ability to perceive objective reality, not objective reality itself, and then drag new insights into that which can be perceived, at least objectively within your senses. You can drag these new insights into that which can be perceived. Right now what we're doing is in essence communicating through what could be arguably called magic. It's something which can't be seen, felt, understood on any physical perceptive level, but yet you're listening to it and we're talking into it. I don't want to get lost in that particular truth, but to get there means that our consciousness had to be well outside our perceived reality, which is, well, if I'm talking into, a piece of tin in the middle of New Jersey somewhere, how can someone in the outer banks of Nova Scotia hear me? Well, that's insane. That could never happen. Well, it can, and it does every day. But how do we get there? We got there through saying, well, I know what perceived reality says, but my consciousness is far vaster. And my consciousness, through this ability to pretend, was able to expand past perception into true reality and drag a piece of it back into perception, if you will. And that's an amazing thing that we kind of almost take for granted. That's the application of my truth, really my truth.
Well, it is something that we do take for granted, but we get fuzzy on the words and the concepts, because unless you have the concept that there is a truth that is outside of your opinion or how you think it should be, then you're at odds with the baseline of your understanding that your consciousness is at the center of all of this, and then defining it, saying that the truth is this, my truth is this. You're putting these limits on who you actually are, because you are operating solely in the realm of defining yourself as an ego. And this is how I operate, and this is who I am. And it's fascinating to see how consciousness can narrow itself down to, well, this is how I respond to that situation. And this is my emotion to that, and that's just the way it's going to be, and nothing else can change. But do you understand that it's very limited? And the truth is, who you actually are goes beyond these likes and dislikes that you think are so important. It's putting weight on this concept of what you like and what you don't like, what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. Consciousness is comfortable with everything. That's really what it comes down to. If you observe it or if you look at it, you understand that consciousness just acknowledges that exists. It doesn't have an opinion on it. It observes it. And most people are not happy to just say, well, that exists. They've got to put their fingers on it and try to manipulate it to make it into something that they like to exist. And it's fascinating because it just, your life in general, the beginning where your birth happens, your life, and then death. It's like, people have been trying for ages to manipulate death so that somehow it's comfortable. And death is not comfortable. In fact, very uncomfortable. You can't make it comfortable.
Well, I want to go back, though. I like that thought, but what you said is fascinating, because it's the same thing, isn't it? It's the same facility to go beyond perceived reality that gets us all these amazing insights into what is true, what the truth is. And you do it by realizing that you're vaster than what you can see. But yet, what you just said is that same facility, in essence, turned against the consciousness, used to limit, to define, and to, in essence, encapsulate energy, to narrow, not to take and say the universe exists within me, but literally to push as hard as it can to hollow out that sphere and then try to put the consciousness inside that. In essence, that's Tolle's, and he goes into this quite a lot, is creating these egoic forms. And you do it with that same facility that we use so brilliantly to have these insights which are beyond that which we can perceive or touch or feel. But yet when you use that facility against the consciousness, where you kind of stuff all of your ego into an ideology, for argument's sake, or all of your ego into, as you mentioned, sort of an emotion, a stimulus response, where my truth means that if you disagree with me, you have to be destroyed, or at least shunned. Now, nothing, I can have no relationship whatsoever with anybody who doesn't agree with me, who doesn't conform to me, where I become not just an observer, but I become a creator of my own little reality ball, this own little, not truth, but fantasy truth, right?
Well, yes. The looking at it and believing that you've got a grip on your truth. You know who you are, and no one can tell you otherwise. And if there is information to the contrary, you go ballistic. It means that you've identified your being with this creation that you put together, instead of residing in the being that you are. The people's response comes up because it feels as if they're being destroyed, as if you are going to evaporate into a null state and there's no trace of you whatsoever. I'd say most people are very afraid of being erased in that way. Again, the response to this concept of death, which is, as most people look at it, they feel that that's the ultimate erasure. There's suddenly my being is gone, and they want to leave, leaving the legacy behind.
Yeah.
But that has to do with that internal fear of being nullified, where there is no record of your existence at all. And what that means is that you haven't touched into your core being state, where you realize that that spark always exists, has always existed, and will always exist. There's a part of you that rails against this idea that you will no longer exist in any form, because that is an untruth. But when you identify outward on these creations or forms or concepts of what you think you are, or who you think you are, it's a very linear way of thinking, so that when something else comes in and nullifies a point, the reaction is, no, that can't be, because I know this is my truth, and my truth will exist forever. So it's like this mishmash of things where people haven't really looked internally to separate out these feelings or concepts, understanding that, well, what I'm hanging on to is actually a construct. It's not really who I am. And touching into who you are allows you to be secure in yourself. You know nothing can destroy it. Nothing ever will. It has been and it will be. Just the form is going to be different. And that kind of confidence and security is something I'd say most people are looking for, even though they go through these very interesting roads, pathways on their life, decisions, wrong decisions, right decisions. Just coming to, they want to find that true security. In understanding that truth, there's true security.
Well, and if we go again back to Tolle's, this idea, what he says in the very first part, we'll go back to our quote, which we started with, the truth is inseparable from who you are.
Yes.
Truth is inseparable from who you are. That statement, we kind of went right by it, but that statement really encapsulates exactly what Margaret just said, is the truth is you. And it's inseparable from who you are, which is your being.
Right.
And I think people, even the most unconscious, think of the truth as sort of lasting forever. If something's true, it's true for all time.
Right.
Gravity, maybe the exaggeration of gravity, because it may have been very not true at the very beginning, but as far as we're concerned now, that particular physical property seems to be true for all time. So, begging that form, the consciousness is true for all time. But getting to the realization that the truth is inseparable from who you are, and not the clouds, which is that, I have to control this piece of my universe. I have to defend any sort of contradiction of who I think I am. Who you think you are has very little to do with the truth. It's not the consciousness, which doesn't need to think about what it is. Thinking is far too narrow to stuff a consciousness into. Yes, thinking is part of your consciousness, but your consciousness is not thought of. If you think of it that way, it's like having, something which is completely limited within itself. This lump of rock over here, somehow being able to imagine itself a fish. Well, it can't. It's just a lump of rock, and it never will be anything but. But the consciousness can look at the rock and say that's an aspect, the fish. All of the universe which exists within it is within that consciousness. So the truth is that. It's inseparable from who you are. And you, in this case, is the greater you. It's the, as Tolle calls it, the greater I. The I of being, not the I which is say, I want this and I want that and I like this and I like that. I don't like this and I don't like that. So his next statement in this, yes, you are the truth. But if you look for it elsewhere, so in other words, if you, the little you, and that's the problem with language, is he goes from you, the who you are, which is the greater I, and then if you look for it elsewhere, which is the little you, is you creating your own little truth bubbles and trying to tell yourself who you are, and then going looking, what are you looking for elsewhere? You're looking for others to validate, to tell you who you are, or to agree with you, or to be the other who is wrong, and you are right and righteous and good and all the things that you are, and everyone else is bad and to be shunned and has the wrong opinions and all. Yeah, that's the looking for it elsewhere. You're not.
You're turning to external validation.
Exactly.
Instead of an inner knowing of who you are, which is an amazing, amazing thing. So moving through this, understanding that this exploration, this is really the spiritual journey that most people undergo. They're trying to find their inner truth, although they're not quite sure what that's going to look like. There's always this idea that it's got to look like something, which is the reason why we have all these philosophies and religions and concepts, because you're trying to find an inner truth. And it's almost an intuitive thing where you know when truth is spoken. There's that incredible, there's a feeling when you hear truth being said. You're like, yes.
Yeah, we call that you called it the heart resonance.
Mm-hmm. And to understand that what you really want is to live in that heart resonance. And most of us go, oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Because there's so much out there that certainly doesn't bring truth to you. In fact, when you listen to certain statements, you go, there may be a kernel of truth in there, but it's not the whole thing. This is a narrowed down, strictly or chosen. Certain things are chosen in that statement to make it appealing.
Mm.
But when truth hits you, you resonate with it. And internally you know that's it. So to abide there, to really abide there, takes courage, because the rest of the world does not want that.
Mm.
It wants to be comforted in their concepts of what they think the world is or who they are. They're always looking for validation. Oh, well, I'll validate your truth if you validate mine.
It's transactional. It's interesting. There's a whole thing here where people will enforce the truth as well. All tyrannies are about controlling of what they call the truth. And that phrase we began with, which is the truth will set you free, the reason it does that, the actual truth, the heart resonance of this is true, these things which are beyond the physical, which are in consciousness, which don't accept or need external validation, resonate at that heart level, but they also they trigger and oftentimes engender severe emotional reactions from those who feel attacked by a heart true statement. A heart true statement is not something which will earn you the accolades and praise of the masses, generally speaking.
Yeah.
In fact, a heart true statement or a expression of a heart true will get you crucified or other bad things,
Yeah.
And
like forgiveness. This idea that you should forgive your enemies. And people get so crazy that they will kill.
Right. Or that all people should be free, or that all are created equal. These things resonate when you say all should be free to choose. That free will is the greatest of all gifts that you can give to yourself and others. That all these types of statements which have resonated, which have rung throughout history, throughout human history, because they are part of us. They are part of our external consciousness, well beyond the perceived reality. They have the unfortunate or fortunate ability to trigger tremendous emotional responses from those whose truths are their truths. In essence, they're encapsulated, guarded, maintained bubbles of belief.
Carefully cultivated,
calcified bubbles of truth. And if you impinge upon them with a heart true statement, first of all, they are attacked because they are extremely fragile to those types of statements. But the emotional charge which resides in there, especially if it's embodied in something with power of a state or of an oppressive regime, will it become that very obvious overreaction where a simple statement of truth, again, can get you crucified, get you killed, get you jailed, get put into a gulag. It's happened throughout our history. Why? A rock is just a rock, and if a rock wants to believe it's a fish, nobody cares. It's still just a rock. And that's the difference. You can put a rock in the middle of a fish pond, and it will never become a fish, and the fish won't care. It's just a rock. They'll poop on it. But if you put truth, heart true resonant, into a fish pond or into something which is somehow encapsulated bunch of my truth beliefs, and you allow that to exist within there, it destroys it. It says, here's the actual truth. Step out of the cave. Turn away from the shadows dancing on the wall. You're free. Well, you get an outsized reaction to that because it's true. It's a not my truth. It is the truth, which is inseparable from who you are. And those who try to enforce their truths by either forcing it or requiring conformity to it are very threatened by that. And yes, you can convert them. Yes, you can find the willing and find the more conscious among them, and you can change the world, literally. A rock can't do that, but our consciousnesses can, and uplift all consciousness, because we are emanations from Source. So you uplift all consciousness this way, but there is a reaction, because those who have embodied a tremendous amount of power in these forms, these egoic pain body forms, don't like to have them disturbed.
Well, they want their pain body fed, which usually means that they will choose conflict and pain, so that aspect of themselves, their pain body, will be nourished by all these negative responses. And if you think about it, do you really want to feed that negative part of you?
Well, oftentimes they do, though.
Well, that basically comes down to understanding that the parts of you that you want to grow, you must feed. So if you want to be a more positive person, you have to feed on more positive things around you, or events, or people, or energies, or being states, atmospheres. If you want to be negative, it's easy to find people who will only choose the negative statement every single time, finding what's wrong with any situation, and certainly not uplift you. They will criticize you to the point of where you have no redeeming qualities at all.
No,
and
subhuman, in fact.
Yes. So you become more malleable. In other words, you're easier to manage if you believe you are less than the person that's speaking to you. It's a power over power under kind of relationship. And the one that has the power begins to dictate the terms. So not accepting that is at the foundation of your being. You can sit there and go, no, I don't receive that. No, I'm not going to do that. And the person that's trying to assert themselves in that dominant state gets angry or angrier because suddenly you're not participating, and that relationship falls apart, because you need two to be able to have the relationship. When one withdraws, then there is none. And that one person who was trying to dominate, spinning in that one spot, looking for someone to establish this idea that this is the dominant one.
Right, and you just, as you just said, that's a my truth.
Yes.
That's an egoic construct that has to be fed.
Right.
And there was a couple of things, because Margaret packs a lot of stuff into a statement there, but it's very, 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 very insightful to say that to the extent that you feed consciousness, you will acquire two things. You'll realize that objective reality, not perceived reality, but objective reality has to be accepted. So reality just happens to all people. And when something occurs within your life, which you have no control over, the ego, the my truth says, I should have known, I could have done this, I could have done that, it must be someone else's fault, blah, blah, blah. And it looks immediately for external validation or for succor from those around it, and how can the universe do this to me, and why me, and why me, and why me? Okay. But to the extent that you want to be more positive or more conscious, you say, why not me? Or, of course, anything can happen to anybody. This I must accept as a condition of being incarnate in this particular physical form. But it is not me. Whatever happens to me doesn't define me. What I like or dislike doesn't define me. I don't try to stuff myself into these my truths and then go immediately out looking for those to feed that lower energy, because then you're literally, first of all, you're carving yourself into pieces. Secondly, you're stuffing all kinds of energy into these little my truth balls, and you're more and more clouding your consciousness and weighting it down. The truth is inseparable from who you really are, and who you really are is a consciousness within which the universe occurs. The burden of controlling the universe is not yours. Who would want it? Who would want to control the universe? What a tremendous burden. The burden, the burden, the opportunity to exist as a consciousness within a particular form for a period of time, very short, in order to experience these things, accept, learn, grow, have relationships, be an emanation of source within creation, but realize that you're in creation, you're not of creation. That wonderful phrase says you are a consciousness within creation, but you are not a created thing in that regard. You are something which is experiencing a piece of creation. Important distinction, because that makes you truth. You are consciousness. You are experiencing that which is. You are able to create something new through that application of consciousness, which is beyond. How could you create something new if you're part of the universe? You can't. You're just a rock. If you're greater than the universe, you can create something new. You can observe that which is completely unperceptible, and then realize that this too is part of the universe and is something which can be brought into a perceptible form. Well, you can't do that unless you're greater. This is the energy is to move in this direction, to move towards consciousness, not move to, you call it lower, but let's say more limited forms, more egoic forms, more energy bound and limited things. That moves you away from consciousness and outside of yourself. And what does Kelly say at the very end there? You will be deceived every time. You'll be wasting your incarnation and not, through your own unfortunate choice, you're not perceiving and experiencing that which you're down here to do, which is relationships and reality.
Right. Thought just occurred to me that, how people toss around the word sin. You've fallen away from God because you've sinned. If you look, there's an anacronym.
No,
an acronym.
That thing that has some letters and stuff. Yeah.
There's an acronym.
Acronym. That could be it. Let's go with that.
For sin. And it is self-imposed narcissism.
Oh.
Which basically breaks you away from, when you say God, I'm looking at God as how he had defined himself as I am, that who I am. I am who am, which is consciousness. So when you sin, you're actually imposing narcissism, this concept of only you, and that rips you away from your being state, or as one of our kids would say, your amness.
Your amness, and you're separating. Okay, you can never be separated from consciousness, because it is you. That's your truth. You're inseparable from consciousness, but you can pretend yourself away from it, and you can block up those channels, and you can literally waste a what's arguably in the framework of consciousness a very short period of time. But you waste the experiential time. You do nothing for yourself until you exit this form and go back into consciousness, and then try again, if you will. But the lack of being conscious doesn't change that you are a consciousness. It can't. Margaret said it earlier in the show. You are already eternal. You know it. You know it. Why do you know it? A rock doesn't know it's eternal. In fact, it should. If it knew anything, you would know it's ephemeral. It's going to be turning into gravel, into pebbles, into dust, into nothing. Well, your form will too. Your consciousness will not, and you know it. And how do you know it? Well, you say, well, I just know it because it's true. Yeah, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't require proof. And in fact, it would be difficult to prove. In fact, Penrose and many others have talked about how consciousness is just outside the system. Mm-hmm. It's something which you say, well, how can consciousness prove itself? And you go, well, you need to be outside of it somehow. And how do you do that? Well, you can't. So you have to just say, axiomatically, we are conscious. Moving on.
It goes back. I'd like to sort of look at it this way. When you are not aware of your consciousness, there is a hole or a lack that you perceive. It's like that's not enough. I have to grab something else from the outside to make me feel comfortable, and I'm not enough. But the truth is, touching into your being, beginning to understand the eternal that is within you, you turn out to be more than enough in that moment. So,
and that's enough.
Right. And we have reached the enough point. So I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.